You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday, 2nd of July 2014. Helston heroine Ingrid Loyo-Kennett detained under Mental Health Act after racist abuse allegation. Wiltshire, convicted sex offender on the run. When they do catch him, they can't keep him. Baroness Ashton's EU diplomatic service inadequate and beset with problems. At least 100 Danes have fought in Syria. Sicily, 30 suffocate on migrant boat. Leaders at African summit vote to have immunity from war crimes and genocide prosecution. Sudan demolishes church in latest persecution of Christians. Thought for the day, I find it very odd indeed. And finally, a courtroom drama. UK News. Helston heroine Ingrid Loyo-Kennett detained under Mental Health Act after racist abuse allegation. Helston heroine Ingrid Loyo-Kennett was detained under the Mental Health Act on Monday after police were concerned for her safety. She'd been questioned by officers about allegedly making abusive and racist comments to a black member of staff at Tesco's Helston. Miss Loyo-Kennett, who is half Scottish, half French, allegedly told a pharmacist that he should not be allowed in England and should be working in Nigeria. Now it's alleged that she fell out with neighbours about the building of a new children's playground next to her home in Bulwark Road. A police spokeswoman said police were called into the Bulwark estate at around lunchtime on Monday over concerns for the welfare of a woman. Following the incident, a 49-year-old woman from Helston has been detained under the Mental Health Act to the Royal Cornwall Hospital and released into the care of the NHS. Wiltshire, convicted sex offender on the run. When they do catch him, they can't keep him. Abdelouaheb Delhoum, 45, originally from Algeria but living in Headington, Oxfordshire, was convicted of 2 counts of sexual assault on a child under 13, 3 counts of inciting a child under 13 to engage in sexual activity and 1 count of rape of a child under 13 years in May. Delhoum was convicted at Swindon Crown Court on May 1, 2014 and was released on conditional bail until June 13, 2014, but he has not returned or made contact with police since. Delhoum is described as Middle Eastern, approximately 5'9", of medium build and with a shaven head. Well, there's a surprise. Not too many of them around, of course. European news. Baroness Ashton's EU diplomatic service inadequate and beset with problems. European Union auditors have highlighted continuing weaknesses in Europe's diplomatic service and problems with Baroness Ashton's track record in the post of High Representative of Foreign Affairs. Bureaucratic turf wars, a lack of political direction and Lady Ashton's lack of attendance at key meetings in Brussels are among the troubles that are still plaguing the European External Action Service, EEAS, 4.5 years after its creation. The European Court of Auditors has found fundamental flaws in how the EEAS and its 140 delegations across the world operate on an annual budget of over £632 million, which is equivalent to €789 million, at a time when the Foreign and Commonwealth Office faces spending cuts. Most of the flaws identified in the running of the EEAS and the role played by Lady Ashton as the EU's foreign minister result from the Lisbon Treaty in 2009 and its botched implementation by national governments and squabbling Brussels institutions. Lady Ashton will be entitled to £400,000 at the taxpayer's expense over 3 years for doing nothing, after finishing her 5-year term as the EU's foreign minister at the end of 2014. Nice job if you can get it. At least 100 Danes have fought in Syria. The Centre for Terror Analysis estimates that at least 15 Danes have died while fighting in the Syrian civil war. Those who come back alive can recruit others and use their military training against domestic targets, the analysis warned. Analysis released by the Danish Security and Intelligence Service, PET, on Saturday revealed that at least 15 Danes have died in Syria while participating in that country's ongoing civil war. Pet Centre for Terror Analysis (CTA) estimated that at least 100 individuals have left Denmark for Syria to fight and that at least 15 of them have died. The analysis also states that CTA expects even more people from Denmark's extremist Muslim environment to join the war in Syria. We've never before seen so many leave Denmark for a conflict zone over such a short period as we see now with Syria, the head of CTA, Søren Jensen, told news agency Ritzau. World at 8, rather them over there than over here. "30 migrants suffocated in a boat." Reported in the Daily Mail, 30 migrants suffocated in the boat holding 600 migrants off the coast of Italy last Sunday. The boat was intercepted between the North African coast and Sicily, and rescuers discovered the bodies in a crammed compartment below deck. The Navy then towed the boat to Polazzo in southern Sicily. More than 60,000 asylum seekers have landed so far on those shores this year, and we're only halfway through this year, and over 5,000 were saved by the Merchant Navy over the last weekend. World at 8. A far cry from the boatload of Muslims turned away by the Australian Navy last week, who retaliated by shouting, and I quote, excuse the language, "Fuck Australia and remember 9/11. We have reason to do this again. It is all your fault." Now, although I would be tempted to turn the boat over as well, I find this lack of manners despicable. It shows the mindset of the average so-called asylum seeker. They seem to think that they should be welcomed on any shore and given homes and money. Call me stupid, but if I went on a boat to Africa or Saudi to make a new life for myself, I can tell you exactly what would happen. I would be shot. Why don't these Muslims, especially from North Africa, go nearer home, perhaps Egypt or Saudi? Don't they like living with their own kind? World News. Leaders at African summit vote to have immunity from war crimes and genocide prosecution. The continent already has 2 sitting presidents and 1 ousted president facing charges at the International Criminal Court. The vote took place on Friday at an African Union summit vote in Equatorial Guinea. During a session journalists were excluded from, and news of it was only mentioned in a statement about the outcome of the summit on Monday, according to Amnesty International. It came to light in a paragraph listing legal instruments agreed at the meeting, including the Protocol on Amendments to the Protocol on the Statute of the African Court of Justice and Human Rights. The amendment bars the court from prosecuting sitting African leaders and vaguely identified senior officials. It was objected to by 42 African and international civil society and rights groups. The decision was condemned by Amnesty International as a backward step in the fight against impunity and a betrayal of victims of serious violations of human rights. World at 8. What do you expect from an African Union summit? Sudan demolishes church in latest persecution of Christians. A Sudanese government force destroyed a church Monday, ignoring the wails of nearby residents, witnesses told journalists working for CNN. The attack came a day after authorities sent a letter saying they would demolish the church, priest Kouar Shimal said. The government forces did not immediately return calls from CNN. Complaints about the predominantly Muslim country's lack of religious freedom came under the international spotlight recently after Mariam Yeha Ibrahim, a Christian mother of 2, refused to renounce her faith and was sentenced to death. After an international outcry, she was freed and reunited with her American husband. The 70-strong force Monday arrived at the Alizbar slums near the capital Khartoum around 10 a.m, witnesses said. Some were dressed in plain clothes. CNN visited the scene afterwards, where the religious site had been reduced to rubble. Thought for the day. I find it very odd indeed. I find it very odd that certain things in England today seem directly in opposition to each other, or in some cases one is entirely ignored and the other, similar instance, is heralded as great justice. I find it very odd that our old sexual abuse cases, never reported at that time officially, have decimated the humour pool of many of our national comics and celebrities. Now, I'm not for anybody groping a 7-year-old, of course, but these so-called abuse crimes of the octogenarian Harris, of which is one of the many prosecutions brought to us as a result of the Yew-Tree Cull, which accused several of these poor old white buggers, excuse the pun, have overwhelmed the media to such a degree that the newer, more insidious and proper sexual abuse victims who have been systematically raped and put out to prostitution, many at 11 years of age, have gone virtually unnoticed in the media and certainly on the TV news, which reaches many more people than paper news. Now, I'm not including Saville here as he's dead and unable to defend himself at all, so we will never know, apart from the usual plethora of mature victims, what he got up to, but anyone in show business at that time is of course affected by his toxic in death reputation. Lurking in the back pages of the papers is the 17-year-old girl raped by Asians, the new Banbury rapists all Muslim. I'm sure that if Nazir Afzal really applied himself to his community's reputation, with Muslim sexual grooming going back 40 odd years, he could find himself in a quagmire of families and communities that have been practising this cultural and anti-Christian grooming going back to the 1960s. And just how much money could be gleaned from these people whose fathers, uncles, sons and brothers have been doing deeds much worse and more hidden than even Saville is guilty of, is worth thinking about. But this is one thought which will not cross Afzal's mind, as he's hell-bent on getting the old white guys who made us laugh. These court cases also, of course, detract the blurb's eyes away from the real problems at hand in this country. The problem, the unnatural rise of Islam, ably helped by the media, and the Coudenhove-Kalergi plan. Now, I'm not saying that Harris didn't perform some rather nasty acts on what seemed to be willing girls at the time, but it boils down to one person's word against another, and these accused men have the media, in all its hypocritical glory, firmly against them. In fact, the newscasters, mainly ethnic, have verged on the hysterical and done the Sisters Act when reporting this case in particular. But if a Muslim sexual grooming case comes up, it is very subdued method of reporting this, and you can bet one night is all it takes up on the screen or the papers. A very different kettle of fish for what is in fact a worse crime. Why? There is no financial benefit at the end for these poor girls or their families, and one law should be applied for all in all cases. Why differentiate between white and non-white abusers financially? There are thousands of unreported rapes and abductions which never see the light of day, and if anything to do with Afzal, they will not see the light of day. This guy is a one-man homing beacon for old white guys with money who are all, or many of them, well past acting out their fantasies except in memory. They are all, for the most part, wealthy and all sitting ducks and answerable in full, apparently, for the 60s, 70s and 80s pop mania and distinct lack of moral codes from our teenagers during and since those years. Now, I'm not including Cyril Smith either, as he was well known at that time to be what he was, a real acting paedophile of the homosexual variety, a music hall joke of a man who was distinctly dangerous to underage children. Everyone, bar the media, knew about Cyril, and even they did, but dare not publish, and everyone knows that underage male children do not benefit financially years after from their terrible ordeals. So Afzal, courts, lawyers and victims need not apply to that particular honeypot. Now, during the 60s I was married and pregnant and unmarried, so didn't have the time or inclination to rush around trying to get famous or laid by someone famous, but when I did I managed that quite quietly by myself. But the atmosphere of the 60s was hedonistic, especially around our once great capital city and anywhere where the famous went on TV or relaxed. If anyone remembers back to the dark ages of the 50s with its standards, morals and much healthier approach to marriage, etc., the 60s suddenly went mad and all the young blurbs went around like American college kids didn't. But their films did. Everyone was at it, the pill was de rigueur and so was sex, from whichever source you wanted. And it was the birthplace of the celebrity culture and the pop culture and the comedian culture as well. Everyone who was anyone wanted to know or be groped by whatever by a celeb. Footballers were little boys who played in the streets, thankfully not near me. So you have a rush of feel-good money, new comedians and celebs on the block, the TV going full tilt promoting these guys, and a very wide range of youngsters and would-be dancers all wanting to get promoted by the casting couch, and to deny that is at least what 90% were at is sheer hypocrisy. The UK during those times and even up to the 80s has always had a lax moral garden for the guy who needed to grope to get by. Anyone working in this environment just put up and shut up. It was always stopped short of real nastiness, well in my case it did, always a joke, and it was just part of our culture. So if it was thus in the work arena, just imagine what it was like for the entertainers. I'm not excusing their bad manners, bad morals or bad judgment, but imagine a normal young man, more money than he's ever had, more girls or guys, whatever, and all available to him. It sounds like a Muslim terrorist gone to heaven, doesn't it? You would think Afsal would be more understanding, wouldn't you? Since the entire Muslim culture seems to exist on the bodies of women and girls, if they're not performing a jihad somewhere, the fact it is our women and girls makes no difference at all. So back to the days of wine and roses and very loose morals from the girls as well. I don't imagine that any of these now very mature women were exactly backward in coming forward for their favourite fellas, do you? Or to get their name in lights, and I'm surprised to see that many of their lives have been ruined by a short quick whatever against a wall or in a cupboard, or simply a bit of a grope. I dare say for a large amount of money many more of these traumatised women will want to supplement their old age pensions with a bit of mullah got from a memory 40 years ago, and which even in law means it is one word against the other, as I didn't see any witnesses to these heinous acts, did you? Also, memory and lawyers are a ghastly combination for someone of lax morals and even worse sexual tendencies from eons ago and who has a bit of money. To me personally, there is a vast amount of difference between a slap on the bum or a crafty feel of one's boob to actual rape, multiple rape, abduction and forced prostitution. Maybe I'm odd, but there it is. Women's rights may be sacred, but if you put yourself in the position of opening a door to a new life and fame, make sure it opens and shuts. Don't open that door 40 years on and get more money from it than you did when the so-called original crime was perpetrated or not. These women have got justice, if that is what they wanted, in the form of an 84-year-old man going to prison for groping or worse, a 14-year-old girl with whom he later, when she was 18, had an affair with, which smacks of collusion to me. He must have had some encouragement, mustn't he? I wonder just how far the legal teams of these greedy cows are pushing for Rolf's millions. It's all money, my friends, all money, and anti-white racism rolled into one lovely, lovely ball. You note it is only the rich abusers who have been sentenced, which could allow the courts to seize assets. The less well-off accused have been let off. Even in poor old Glitter's case, he'd paid the Thai girl's parents money to marry her, and let's face it, the Thais would sell their own grandmothers for money, let alone their daughters and sons. I don't stand up for rapists who rape little children of either sex, and I mean little children. Although still young in Western eyes, up to 11 to me means a child is a child and sacrosanct, you do not touch. But in many foreign cultures, and I mean the Thais and many more, 12 is an age when a girl can be married, and indeed our Muslim populations are carrying out those marriages even now, even if they go to Pakistan or Saudi to do it. So age is a consideration, and when our Muslim abusers are multi-raping girls of 11 and putting them out to sell themselves, it makes a grope many years ago look a little bit harmless, doesn't it? I find it odd that our sense of perspective is rather warped on paedophilia. We encourage the age of consent for homosexual activity to be brought down. We want the month that we can abort brought forward. We call any form of sexual activity with a teenager paedophilia, when in fact, although under 18, it really isn't, and crucify old white guys when I doubt whether the females involved were just standing there or sitting there playing tiddlywinks. All rather hypocritical, isn't it? I also find odd, off topic, that there was a programme on the TV called The Rise of the Super Rats, which sounds to me like the rise of the far right, which didn't even mention the rise of the super immigrant who lives in many of these places that have suddenly acquired large rats. Why would that be? Could it be they live like rats and attract rats, and like rats are increasing their numbers? I'm not saying that many of our white trash do not live worse than rats, of course many do. But if you live in a hovel, keep it like a hovel, don't wash up, don't clean and don't improve your property or rented property, don't blame the rats for coming to stay. As they say in the Bible, each shall seek his own kind, but I happen to like rats, but not immigrants much. But what I find most perverse is the way in which the media declines to mention, when doing programmes or articles, the fact that immigration has altered our entire way of living and seeing what is in front of our face. And that is not a good thing, even for the blurbs. When an immigrant takes hold of our judicial systems, as in the case of Afzal, then be afraid, be very afraid. And don't pat my bum, matey, I could come back to you for lots of money for my trauma. Well, at my age I couldn't, but what the hell. And finally, a court drama. A 7-year-old boy was at the centre of a courtroom drama yesterday when he challenged a court ruling over who should have custody of him. The boy has a history of being beaten by his parents, and the judge initially awarded custody to his aunt, in keeping with the child custody law and regulations requiring that family unity be maintained to the degree possible. The boy surprised the court when he proclaimed that his aunt beat him more than his parents, and he adamantly refused to live with her. When the judge suggested that he live with his grandparents, the boy cried out that they also beat him. After considering the remainder of the immediate family and learning that domestic violence was apparently a way of life amongst them, the judge took the unprecedented step of allowing the boy to propose who should have custody of him. After 2 recesses to check legal references and confer with child welfare officials, the judge granted temporary custody to the England football team, whom the boy firmly believes are not capable of beating anyone. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I wish you all a very good night.